Welcome. My name is Jessica Merrill. I'm the communications manager. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And today I'm joining you from the Yokuts, Bamiwak, and Moakma land in the Bay Area. So good to have you here today. I am just proud and excited to introduce two movement leaders today. We have Zoe Flowers and Diane Gout, and I'd like to just pass the mic to you first to introduce yourselves and your pronouns and the land you're on today.
I'm Diane Gout, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I reside on the land, the ancestral lands of the Abenaki Confederation, the Sokoki, and the Pequawket peoples.
And I'm Zoe Flowers, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am calling in from Brooklyn, New York, and this is the original land of the Iroquois, the Oneida, and the Mexicantuck, and many, many more.
Thank you so much, Zoe and Diane. And so today we'd like to acknowledge that the land is not just an agenda item or a box to check off, right? It's acknowledging the land and the original people of the land as an Indigenous protocol, and the practice establishes a respectful routine and a habit of supporting these nations and prioritizing decolonizations. So any land acknowledgement, from what I've learned, thanks to Siboney Jimenez, my colleague, should have a call to action, right? So if you're watching this, I encourage you to find the tribal community nearest you and look for ways to support them. Look for ways to lift up their voices. So let's transition into just like sharing a little bit about ourselves. I would love to learn one fun fact about you.
I think that the fun fact that's coming to mind right now is I have a very extensive tarot and oracle card collection / problem / addiction. I think I'm up to about 60 decks at this point in my life. Yeah, that I started collecting last year.
Already 60? That's amazing.
In a year.
Yeah, I started last year. And it actually was very soothing to me during the pandemic because it would give me something to look forward to, like searching for them and then unboxing them and just, yeah. So now it continues. I just keep buying cards. So
love it.
That's my fact.
Diane, how about you?
Oh, it took me a minute. So I had to actually think about it for a while, ask everybody I knew if there's actually anything fun about me. But the one that I came up with is that a couple of years ago, I did a 3,000-mile trek on my Harley from Maine to Michigan, driving all the way through Canada. And at one point I had a moose come up on the road with me, and he ran next to me. My husband said that the top of my helmet came right underneath his belly. That's how big this guy was.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty amazing. And I'm a little on the vertically challenged side, so I'm short. And because of that, my bike, I had to get my motorcycle boots were amended to add 1.5 inches of rubber on the bottom of them. So I kind of look like I'm walking around like Herman Munster feet. So that's my fun fact.
That is badass though, truly. I really want those boots.
They're pretty cool.
This is so exciting. And today is an opportunity, as Zoe is leaving the organization, just to thank her for all the ways she helped establish the team, right? Get it on its feet, set up some of the ways of being that establish evaluation as a major component of our work and honoring the stories of the movement. And also we want to welcome Diane as Zoe passes the torch to her. The team itself will be comprised of the Impact Strategies Manager, Project Management Coordinator, and an Impact Strategies Director. So I'd like to start with a question for both of you. Transformation in organizations starts with ourselves. You've helped me learn that. Zoe, can you explain the importance of people examining their why they work in an organization, their positions, and why now?
Yeah, I think it's so important because, first of all, if we're trying to transform this field, if we don't know why we're in the field, that's definitely problematic. And I feel like it's something that I've seen over the years where the work can become robotic. And I know for me, having that why, and the why can change, right? But at least having that, that thing that I can draw back on when the work gets hard, which it will, when the work gets boring, which it will, when it feels isolating, which it will, I can always, click back into why I'm actually doing it. And I just think it's important for us to have some real touchstones, especially where we are sort of as a nation when people are questioning so many things. I think it's the perfect time for people to investigate why they're doing the work that they do.
Thank you so much. And speaking of growing and evolving, right, and consistently looking inward at ourselves, Diane, can you discuss how flexibility and a learning mindset are at the heart of evaluation?
Yeah, so I think we're always doing this work, right? And one of the things when we're starting it is sort of thinking about always including it at the beginning of everything that we do. And because we're required to do it in a lot of ways with our funders and we have to collect that information, if we started at the beginning, we don't have to deal with sort of the nightmare of examining retrospective data, like going back and having to recollect things and get the information we need. So, I tell people sort of dust off your logic models, your timelines, bring them out, look at them, figure out what you're doing, why you're doing it. I think it goes back to Zoe's why. Why do you want to do this work? And being able to sort of uncover that in doing your evaluation. And I think that if COVID sort of taught us anything, it taught us that we have to be able to readjust. We have to be able to refocus. We have to be able to regroup. And it means that we might be on one path and we have to stop, take a look at it, and we're going to get redirected onto another path. And that requires flexibility, and that requires us to think about what we're doing in a different way and not always getting into the groove of just it being one way to get there, one mode of transportation. It's like, well, when the bus breaks down, how do you get there? When when your car is not working, how do you get there? It's always having to rethink how we do it. And, part of that also is understanding that when you're able to be flexible, it allows you an opportunity to be able to maybe discover things that you would not have otherwise discovered, and being open to that process. And I haven't ever really engaged in a process of evaluation where I didn't uncover a nugget that wasn't a surprise to me. It's like, I sort of expect some of the things, I anticipate a lot of things I'm going to maybe see. And then when I'm open to that process, I learn things that I hadn't anticipated. And that's the beauty of doing this work.
Thank you so much. Zoe brought up the importance of not being robotic in this work. Diane, can you continue a little bit and let us know how one could get started with viewing evaluation expansively and not getting too caught up in strictly following deliverables?
Yeah, and that's breaking out of a pattern, right? Because, so many organizations are contingent on funding. And so they have to be able to do those things that the organization or the funders put forward. They have to be able to deliver on those. And so, yes, you need to be able to do that part. But what I also tell people, and what I hope that they can learn to do, is think about data differently and really think about the fact that we're not just collecting numbers, but we're telling stories about our organization. We're telling stories about the people we serve, their communities, and everybody has a story. Programs have a story, people have stories, and that's what that data represents. And my job is really sort of to get them to think outside of that and to demystify that process. So it's not a scary thing when your funder says, I want you to do an evaluation on your activities. They're not like panicking. They're like, oh, I know what that means. I'm going to tell a story. And I'm going to tell the best story and the most accurate story I can. And so I try to move a little bit away from the academic piece of that, because a lot of the programs I've worked with, tribal programs, community-based organizations, they don't necessarily want to see just those academic numbers or those that academic process at play in their communities, because a lot of that was built in white supremacy. And that doesn't necessarily work for, those organizations. And so my job is sort of to figure out how to honor the things that they already know and how to bring a set of tools to them so that they're able to document that themselves, to own their data themselves, and to tell their stories in the best way they can.
Mhm. Thank you. And Zoe, I would love to hear how you illustrate some of these concepts through this example of the Uber study that you've been talking about.
Yeah, so Diane and I worked together on an Uber project several years back. And initially, we thought that we would do listening sessions with folks to find out why historically marginalized communities were experiencing higher levels of victimization while they were traveling in Uber. And when I went all around and did a series of listening sessions across the country, and we put that report together. And then when the second iteration of the project started, we went back and we looked at those questions, and our advisory committee, right, had their own stories about the data that we shared as well. And so while our organization was ready to sort of go global and make these global connections around transportation, our advisory committee said, wait a minute, there are some communities here still that we don't feel that you all have investigated enough. And so we went back and Diane and I looked at the questions, and we realized that we had to go back and tell a larger story. So it wasn't enough just to say, why were marginalized people experiencing victimization or perpetration, right? We had to really look at why were women identified people just unsafe in the world. So we had to adjust, you know, not all of the questions, but quite a few, so that we could tell a broader story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Diane, would you also like to comment on the Uber study?
Yeah, I think when we were looking at that, you know, one of the things that we realized is that, yes, we can collect the information you need and help you understand why the rideshare or the Uber transportation was problematic for certain populations. But what we realized is that most people didn't even understand why transportation was imperative to certain populations, and how just being able to access transportation was a safety issue. And that's why we ended up going back to that too, is sort of figure out, like, there are all these spaces in which women and certain marginalized populations are just unsafe. And the world has sort of been built around them as opposed to including them in that process. And so how do we get that out and open for people to sort of fully have them understand, you know, what's going on with Uber and accessing those types of services?
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, Diane, if I remember, we knew that it wouldn't make sense to go back to this huge corporation and tell them all the things that they did wrong by not having people at the table in the first place. But we knew that they needed a baseline understanding of what was really happening with communities as well. So that is also why we wanted to tell that larger story, because we knew at the same time that it was a huge opportunity even for us to be in the conversation with a I don't know if it's $1 billion at this point.
Worldwide, right?
Right, global, this global conglomeration to ask, you know, a few domestic violence programs, even though we were national and international. But still, we knew that we had an opportunity to at least tell a real story about us and what's happening in our communities.
Right.
Yeah.
The full story, right?
That's right.
It wasn't just a segment. We were expanding it so that it had a beginning.
That's right. That's right.
Those are great insights about storytelling. And on that same theme, I'd like to ask, how else have each of you used qualitative or quantitative data to tell a story? And let's start with Zoe, please.
Yeah, sure. So the Uber project definitely was a part of the work, but not directly connected to domestic violence, I'll say. But I would say that work that I've done directly in our field was at one of the coalitions that I worked with. We wanted to know what was happening with survivors across the state when it came to, did they feel that our coalition was meeting their needs? So I went and I did on-site visits with them. We did audits of their program, their policies, and also just talked to survivors about, you know, did you feel that you're being treated fairly? At that time, though, it's interesting, we had no questions about race on that, on that listening session, but we asked all these other questions about their experiences with the shelter that they were actually in, and also with our coalition. And then we used that data that we got from them to create programming that the coalition put forward. And as far as the audits, we were actually a pass-through coalition, so we actually funded the shelters. And so when we did their audits, then we created trainings to meet the needs of the specific shelters. And then most recently, I'm engaged with a project with the University of Florida, and we did a research project this year surveying students and doing listening sessions with Black students in particular at the University of Florida and at FAMU, which is a historically Black institution in Florida, to find out how the universities responded to them during COVID and during the Black Lives Matter movement. We'll be sharing those findings at a conference in Atlanta, actually on November 19th.
Thank you. I'd love to share that out too. When the results are ready. Thank you.
Yeah.
Diane, what about you? How have you used quantitative and qualitative data to tell a story?
I don't tell a story unless I employ both. I think that if you only use one, then you're only getting half of the picture, right? And so I sort of liken it to trees. I see the hard data, the numbers as sort of the trunk and the base and the branches. And then I see the qualitative as the leaves, and it tells us what tree we have, you know, and the color of the bark. You know, it's like, what are we looking at? And so I think any good sort of evaluation has both components involved. And so one of the projects that I worked on that I was really excited with was working in a tribal community where we were developing specialized sexual assault services for the victims and survivors. So also including child victims of sexual abuse and sexual assault, as well as adults who were victimized as children, and then sexual assault survivors, adult sexual assault survivors in the community. And we did a survey of all of their employees in the tribe, and then we surveyed community members. And once we did that, we went out and conducted focus groups, and because of COVID and because we had to readjust, those focus groups ended up being interviews that I conducted with over 80 tribal members from the ages of 18 to 83. And so now we've analyzed all of our data and we've presented it to tribal council and to all of the different employment departments in the tribe. And we've presented the information to the community. So we took the information back to the community so that they could see their voices reflected in that, in the findings, and their quotes and their recommendations, and allowing them to be able to have that opportunity to be fully engaged at whatever level they want to be engaged in. And so we've asked some of them to also be part of the advisory team for implementing the findings, and all of that because we decided to take a different approach. We could have just done a needs assessment and been done with it, right? But we ended up using, you know, a multi-method approach to this, and it's part of a healing process for them as well, because they get an opportunity to tell their stories and to be honored, because when we really think about it, we're more than just a number, you know, we're more than just a percent. These are human beings with real life human stories and human experiences, and doing it this way allows us to honor that. And so that's one of my projects.
Thank you so much, Diane. And I love how you described building equity into the research process. So I think we're about ready to wrap up. I would love to end on an aspirational note. Could you share one hope for the partnership's future or the movement's future as a whole? And let's start with Zoe.
Sure, I'll start with the movement. So one hope I would have for the movement is that we all live up to what we say we're doing. So we say that we meet survivors where we are. I would hope that we would begin to do that. We say that we are inclusive and we serve all women. I would like to see us serve all people. I would like to see that happen. I would like to see more women of color in leadership. I would love for them to be able to stay in the work. And for the partnership, I would like to see everybody thriving, feeling like they're thriving and they're doing the work that they really want to do, and that they feel that they're making the change that they want to make.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What about you, Diane?
I think mine sort of covers both in a lot of ways. So I'd really like to see the partnership work to empower programs and communities to document and own their own stories. I think, especially as I'm getting older, and I started this work in the 90s, we've come a long way in this work in a lot of ways. We have a long way to go. You know, there's a lot of things that Zoe just talked about, you know, the real equity and real inclusion, and where the people are, not where we think they should be, is so incredibly important. But one of the pieces I think that's missing is sort of that robust documentation of our work. And, you know, particularly for those who came before us and all that they did, but also for those who are coming after us. We have all these youth and they're doing amazing things in the world, all over the world. And I think that it's really important for them to understand just how hard we fought, we innovated, we persevered, so that they have that space to do it themselves as well. And I think that as a movement, we need to really honor their place and make sure that we're giving them the space, all youth, you know, and that the partnership, I think, can be a part of that. And that's what I'd like to see happen.
Wonderful. And I would just echo what you both said. I think in particular, I would love for the partnership to be flexible and nimble with our actions, to constantly be in a learning mindset, to advance prevention by building equity into all of our processes, and just living into our goal of transformation to really end domestic violence. So I think that wraps it up. Thanks for this conversation. I loved it.
Thank you, Jess. I know it's fun.